Hi, welcome. Take a seat. I've been asked, my name is Nicola Manos. I'm a speaker in the session after the afternoon tea break, and I've just been asked to chair this session. So I'm here to keep everyone on time and introduce everyone. So please try and stick to the times allocated so that everyone can get their time to speak. I'll get straight into it. I think everyone's here. I hope you had a nice lunch. First of all, we've got Georgina Jones, and she will be talking to us about engaging schools and the community in riparian restoration, a Wilson River case study. Welcome.
Thank you. No, I think I'll just use this one. Let me know if it's not loud enough. We've got a bit of challenge with the jackhammers. So I'm Georgina. I work for an ecological restoration organisation called Envite. So we do a range of environmental restoration work from southeast Queensland down to Victoria. So the Wilson's River Tidal Pool Restoration Project is a Rouse County Council project that was funded by the New South Wales Environmental Trust, which involves students and teachers participating, working with stakeholders, including Landcare and local council, to participate in environmental education and ecological regeneration of sites within the Wilson's River tidal pool. The project is a continuation of a previous grant that was successfully implemented in 2012 to 2014. So I'm talking effectively about 6 years of project work that's been undertaken through this period. So just to put it in a bit of context, we're up in Brisbane. The Wilson's River catchment is down in Lismore. It's about 3 hours south of here, and they're the participating schools that we worked with, 7 high school and primary schools. There are a large number of stakeholders involved in the project, over 25, 7 schools as I mentioned, and then a range of local council, not-for-profit environmental organisations and Southern Cross University, so a range of organisations. They were some of the key stakeholders of New South Wales Environmental Trust that funds a broad range of organisations to undertake projects to enhance the environment in New South Wales. Rouse County Council is a regional water supply authority that provides water to most councils in the northern rivers of New South Wales. And my organisation, I was engaged to coordinate the project, and then key to the success of the project as well were a body of educators, the Northern Rivers Group of environmental educators who deliver sustainability education across the northern rivers. And so there were 2 programs run per school over 3 years, where staff and student groups participated in a range of activities, including learning about catchment health and waste management, recycling, wildlife awareness, koala ecology, and central to the program were the on-ground works to restore a degraded riparian area, which each school could then utilise as an outdoor classroom or, I guess, an ecological restoration demonstration site. And those activities were undertaken on school grounds or a site nearby. Events were unique to schools, so they were driven by the schools, and so they would range from the program running for the whole day, with the whole school involved, to maybe a Year 11 biology class running a specialised in-depth study. The value of this project was really enhanced by working with a number of organisations who have a real commitment to providing quality environmental education, providing opportunities to develop awareness of the significance of the natural environment, and also providing students with the knowledge and skills to restore native vegetation communities and habitat for wildlife. And that really empowers students and teachers and the community to feel like that they're really making a difference to their local environment. And the work's also contributed to enhancing landscape scale riparian connectivity. The achievements over the 6 years have been over 13,000 trees planted, 6 hectares of creek riparian land rehabilitated, and nearly 4,000 high school and primary school students engaged in the project. The projects really were successful in achieving and exceeding objectives, and the strengths really were working with committed environmental volunteers and expert organisations to increase school students' skills and knowledge and awareness of the local environment and associated issues. Working with schools, empowering students to make a difference to their local environment. And also key were having professional bush regenerators working to implement best practice restoration techniques in partnership with the schools and the land managers and local community. So by holding events continuously over this 6-year period, we really got to develop good relationships with teaching staff and educators, and so the students and teachers got to see their trees become really well established and the habitat that they were able to provide for wildlife, Indigenous kids getting an opportunity to connect to country in their backyard too. And I would say key to this project really was the Rouse County Council's commitment to fund a large number of on-ground bush regeneration days. So they funded weed control work on riparian sites, planting preparation. They assisted students with planting on the days, but key, as we know, the planting was maintaining these sites once the trees were in the ground. And so having a long-term commitment to maintenance has ensured that the trees have been able to become successfully established. Also, the program then provided for some unique learning opportunities for schools. Education providers were able to support schools to implement environmental sustainability into curriculum outcomes in HSIE and science, for example. And there was a range of units that were developed in association with this project, including sort of Year 7 biological classification science units where students were identifying native plants on sites, or an ecosystems unit in Year 9 where students were doing population estimates and measuring components of ecosystems, right to a Year 11 biology depth study where students collected data on the dam to answer a guiding question about how they could use their knowledge of ecosystem dynamics to protect biodiversity for the future. So water quality testing, bug surveying. Really unique to the project too was some of the high school students do agricultural studies. And these, Lismore's a country area, so a lot of these schools have had these riparian areas and weedy areas, and these students were able to work alongside bush regenerators and the ag teachers too to learn how to control weeds using sort of what we would call best practice in the industry too. So these students were also looking at this as a window or a potential career opportunity too that they might not have considered before. And there they are working in a remnant at St John's College in Woodlawn Tree. There was a range of small leaf privet and ochre through the site there. Some of the problems with the site on that area is Wilson's River and Lismore is prone to major flood events. So the survival rate of trees was, I would say, over 90%, but because the right trees were planted in the right areas, but obviously associated with flooding is rubbish debris, and there's also a continuous weed source coming into sites from floodwaters too. That's students walking through a planting. Some of these students actually planted these trees when they were in kindergarten, and they're walking through this planting now, able to see birds and birds' nests through here. This would be typical of a site, a riparian site that was managed. That's Camp Laurel that you can see in the foreground there. And then this is 4 years later. The Camp Laurel has either been stem injected or it was actually physically removed in this case too, and these plantings are about 4 years old. The camp in the back is actually on the other side of the river there. This is some of bush regenerators. This would be typical of one of the restoration sites. That's coral tree, vine weeds, degrading areas there. This is the same site. So there was a bit of native veg here. This is a planting that's about a year old, and then this is the same planting 5 years later. That's that same native tree that you can see here. So really transforming sites there too. Students were also surveyed after each event to see what they liked about the program, what worked for them and what didn't. You know, over 90% of these students and teachers thought it was valuable to learn about the environment and catchment health. The overwhelmingly most popular activity was tree planting on the day, but they also thought the most important things to learn about were that they could protect the environment by planting trees and how to recycle and help whales. So there were some suggestions for improvement, time management. Sometimes there were big classes and not everyone could do an activity. They were rotating, and if the weather was hot, it was a bit challenging sometimes. So these students, primary school planting, they've just finished a planting. This is the same area, maybe a year and a half down the track, and this is the same area again now. So it made a big difference to their environment. So that's all I'll talk about today. So if you've got any questions, I might have a minute to answer anything. Yeah, Ralph Water has committed to maintaining these sites. Some children are, it depends. So it's a real collaboration. So some schools will have a green group that will go through and do some handwork, but mostly it's professional regenerators or local council funding on their sites. The maintenance of this work at this stage too. Yeah, we approached them individually and also just from their locality on the Wilson's River there, or a tributary too.
When you talk about best practice, what do you mean by that?
Australian Association of Bush Regeneration techniques, so professional bush regenerators coming in and doing the work, choosing the plants and species, making sure we're using the correct stock and maintenance of the work too.
Do the schools themselves use a plant production?
Not in this case, no. Thanks. I wish there was some progress on that around when I was at school.
We've got our next speaker here. I'd like to introduce Brett Rutland. He's going to be talking about Pest Free Auckland, enabling community-led conservation. Thank you.
Okay. But thank you and afternoon everyone. I've got a few slides to go through, so I'll rattle through them quite quickly. Pest Free Auckland is a reasonably ambitious project, and there are a few of these around New Zealand trying to largely eradicate predators. And we're talking about mostly mustelids, rats, and possums. And I know there's Australia, but possums are a major problem in New Zealand. Pest Free Auckland is a project that is community-centric based and a whole lot of social-based marketing, social activity, engagement kind of activities and principles built into it. And I hope some of those come through as we talk. the underlying thing that we're trying to achieve, and although it's a pest, focusing on pests is an output rather than an outcome, really what we're trying to achieve is restoration of Auckland's biodiversity, both in the urban and rural setting outside of protected areas. All right. So our current state is not a happy one in Auckland, and this is a bit of a reality check. But the Hauraki Gulf, and I don't know if you know the geography of Auckland, but just to the east there's a magnificent gulf called the Hauraki Gulf, which is a really rich in biodiversity spot, and it's got one of the richest seabird sites, a number of endemic species. We host 20% of New Zealand's threatened species there. At the time I wrote this, there were 44 islands in the Gulf of 50 that were mammalian pest free. There have just been 2 operations that take it up to 46, and another one launched on Sunday to deal with that one. So there'll be 47 out of 50. And then we enjoy a huge amount of community-led conservation at the moment, and I'll expand on that. Most importantly, throughout Auckland, or throughout New Zealand, really, there's this unprecedented social license, social appetite to restore the country's biodiversity, and we haven't had this before, and I've been in this business for well over 30 years, and just haven't had this before. It's quite an unprecedented. But over the last, I suppose, time that we can imagine, and this is what our politicians are starting to understand, and our community leaders really, is that for the last as long as time can be remembered, we've been managing the rate of decline, and that's a fairly tough position to accept. Doesn't matter how much money is being spent on the natural environment. So far, it's just been adjusting the rate of decline. Auckland is one of the weediest cities in the world. It's arguable between Auckland or Honolulu. Our native species are outnumbered 5 to 1 in terms of invasive species. An iconic podocarp, the Cody, will disappear in the next 30 years, and it's got an ecosystem of its own. So there's some fairly sort of stark realities that people need to understand. I think as a result of some fairly forthright and honest conversations, because of that social license, people have now accepted that change needs to occur. So we are building on current activities. I mentioned just over a wee while ago, there's 25% of Auckland has some form of community-led conservation activity, restoration activity, and these dots indicate where that is across the region. Those dots aren't to scale. We weren't able to do that at the time, but nevertheless, those dots do indicate where there were community groups, and I'll show you the change a little bit later, year on. So Pest Free Auckland is a concurrent restoration and eradication program. You can't do one without the other. We all know that. So in some cases, people are more interested in the outputs and the killing, and in some cases, people are more interested in the outcome or the cuddling. They talk about koala. It seems to be an iconic species in New Zealand. It's kiwi and porkaka and things like that, which are somewhat different. But that's sort of our charismatic megafauna, and people can relate to that because it's rather unusual. But as in Georgina's case and others, partnerships and collaboration is absolutely fundamental. This problem is a wicked problem that's just too big for anyone on its own. So three program elements. It's around council action. Auckland is a unitary authority in our context, so it's both a regional and a local government. We administer parks, so we need to do some more on it. There's community action, which is community involves households, landowners, communities, schools, a whole range of people. And its third element is building capacity and telling stories, so people know what to do. And in many cases, it's not actually important what they start on; it's just getting going. Sorry. All right. So what have we done so far? So we launched the Pest Free Auckland program in June of last year. So in just over a year, we've had a number of activities. We had our first Auckland Pestival a year ago, and that was around bringing community groups together to showcase what community groups are doing to restore around the region. At that stage, we were able to, that 25% of Auckland was being done by around 450 odd groups. Was well attended with 400 odd people. We also actively engaged the audience and asked them specifically give us warts and all how council can help them do more stuff better. How can we get out of the way? How can we empower, enable, support? How can we make the boat go faster? We've got a bunch of people from academia and leading conservation research, etc., to share their insights and stimulate and inspire, and also share some of the innovation that's occurring. So we actively started telling stories, telling their stories to promote their work, which was rather beneficial when it came to funding. Certainly, there's a lot more awareness of what these groups were doing. We also started a Pest of the Month type initiative in magazines and newsletters, and where we started planning ahead so that groups would know what species to start controlling, whether it be weeds or invertebrates or mammals, whatever they might be. But gave them a lead in time, so that the best things were being done at the best time. We introduced a word mark, which is this little one at the bottom page. It's reasonably small and innocent, but what we started finding is that funders were giving preferential buying power to groups using that word mark, which is a rather interesting outcome that we couldn't have predicted. So it's become quite valuable in its own case. We've expanded, we've supported the community groups do more things in backyards, schools, farms, parks. A lot of that has been eradication based. Others equally has been restoration based. But there are now over 2,000, in fact it's 2,320 groups that are involved in Auckland. So we've gone from 450 to over 2,200 or so, give or take, in a year, which is quite staggering growth, really. So that was the map a year ago, and this is the map now. So it's reasonably well saturated, but there's still some gaps that we need to work on, which we can, and that's what we're working on for the next year or so. Simple things that we've been able to do. When you're looking at eradication, it's quite a different approach to control or management at an agreed level. So when you're looking at eradication, you're targeting the very last animal. You're not targeting the first animal. So the density of traps in that suburb, which is just over 1,000 hectares, and that's reasonably highly populated part of Auckland. It has every 50 by 100 metre sort of connects is where there's a trap. It's a ground-based operation, but we lift all the tenure, the houses, the roads, the boundaries, the parks, all the different land tenure, lay the network, and then put everything back. And then once you work out you can easily work out the property, and you send that loaner, the corresponding landowner, a congratulations letter. Well done, you've earned the right to get something back in your tax. We will give you a trap, and most people are up for it, which is great, really, really great. We've been making use of our size and expertise. There's a lot of council that we can share. We got buying power. We're putting the regional pest management plan as a statutory document that protects it. But most importantly, the last 2 months, our council agreed to spend another $311 million. It's a fourfold increase. So that's where they're seeing the value, and that's very good news, really. We have mapped our current relationships. Now that's a reasonably synthesised version of all the relationships in Auckland. We can simplify it to that. And once we start understanding all the relationships and who's involved and how they all connect, it makes it a lot easier. Then as an agency, we are reasonably siloed. We've got 10,000 people working for Auckland Council in just different parts, and we work in silos. So we're trying to break that down a bit. So working on. So I mentioned that $311 million, that's how we're starting to spend it, increasing our activity on parks, pathogens, in the marine environment, biodiversity, biosecurity, and then particularly that third bullet around expanding community action. There's elements around connecting corridors and creating corridors, particularly around the riparian theme, so we get water quality improvement as well. But then we'll get these corridors that species are able to move through. Increased coordination and facilitation support, more tools, more advice on the ground specific to the site. We're developing a one-stop shop where council and community groups can access and use the same data. So it's quite an important thing around privacy, also around transparency. But privacy issues need to be protected. We don't need to know that there's activity at 15 Church Street, but we need to know that there's activity on Church Street, so we protect the landowners' information there. But importantly, we can't access all the data sets because they're being built all the time. Next week there'll be another one, but the system needs to be able to harvest all those other data sets that are out there. And from a technical perspective, that's doable. So all of that will feed into real-time monitoring and showing results. So as soon as the data is inputted at some point, it'll pop up showing change. Part of that CRM will then record a whole lot of activities, a whole lot of agreements and things. So when staff change, we actually know what's been agreed and what's been achieved. Other linkages, sort of rattle through time here, connecting to a regional remote sensing system. Even though Auckland is an urban environment, there's still a lot of dead spots, so it needs to be satellite linked. We're developing a geolocating risk management tool, so that as particularly international tourists in the camper vans on the iPad will as they're moving along, the system will predict where they're going and give them issues around invasive species that they might come in contact with and ways to manage that. So we've learned, if you want big change, there are a few things that we've picked up. You need to go broad, lots of people, lots of places, got to go deep. It's got to be sustained. Attribution is really important. Too often councils and government takes attribution of others, and it's important to leave that where it belongs. You need lots of sustained energy. Social appetite is absolutely critical, and when you get it, you've got to maintain it. Ultimately, all that leads to a changed mind and a changed behaviour in some small way, which then influences change. You need your leaders, your political leaders especially, to be confident and be bold. They're the ones who will back it. And as staff, from a staffing perspective, you just need to lead from the rear and let others do the job. Just. Thank you.
I'm just curious as to what changed in the last 30 years. If I grew up there, I left this about 30 years ago, and I had an interest obviously in nature conservation, all that sort of stuff. I was the sort of minority, so what changed in that time frame?
It was a political statement. There had been a lot of lobbying by various people to various other people around that if we don't do something now, we're in the shtuck and it's going to be irreversible. And so the use of facts and figures was really useful. So, within your lifetime, these species are going to be gone, and unless you do something, because you're in a position to do something, it's going to be your fault. Politicians typically don't like that, but that was the hard reality. And then we had the Prime Minister at the time, John Key, the Minister of Conservation, Minister for the Environment, the Minister of Finance stand up together and said, New Zealand's going to launch a predator-free project. And that was the big, bold political aspiration. And they equated it at the time to saying this was New Zealand's moonshot. Now, there's a big difference between predator-free and pest-free. Auckland has got bigger problems in terms of feral goats and pigs and weeds and all sorts of other things. So we've broadened it much bigger than just predators.
We might have just one more quick one, I think, someone else. Yeah.
Responsible pet ownership. It's not only cats, it's dogs, it's goldfish, it's hedgehogs, it's hamsters, it's koi, it's bearded dragons. But it's all around promoting responsible ownership of your pet. And then you put in behaviours to match that. So if it's cats, keep it in at night, microchipped, so we can trace the owner. And then also promoting, the groups that are promoting sort of last cat type programs. Yeah, there are a few of those actually that are more than just cats. There's some pet free places. So whether it's dogs, cats, or budgies. Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you very
Cheers.
much. For our next speaker, Todd Atkinson, will be talking about Rehabilitating Roe 8, a standard approach to a not-so-standard restoration project. Please welcome.
Okay, good afternoon. I'm Tom. I work for an environmental consultancy called Emerge Associates over in Perth, and it's a great pleasure to be able to come over to Brisbane and present to you today on this pretty unique restoration project. The particular project I'll be talking about is called Rehabilitating Roe 8, and it's only just started, so the aspects I'll be talking about today are more about the work that's gone into preparing the management plan for the project. And the reason that it's an interesting project to discuss largely stems around from the fact that it had a very kind of controversial beginning. And so it's a really good example of how social aspects in restoration are really critical to the planning for a project. Right, so Roe 8. I notice I don't have a little Australian inset there, but I presume people know where Perth is on the other side of the country. Roe 8 was or more specifically the Roe 8 extension of the Roe Highway, was earmarked to run through a road easement just down here in suburbs of Butland and Coolabah, and as part of a kind of a larger project which was called the Perth Freight Link. And the idea of the Perth Freight Link was it kind of links industrial area to the Port of Fremantle. So there was some kind of bigger lever planning and stuff behind it that were there. But it was extremely controversial. It's not an overstatement to say that. There was legal challenges and lots of really tense protests that focused on the project. All of this meant that it had a high amount of publicity, and it became an issue at a state government election that was occurring at about the time the project was online. The works did begin on the project in late 2016. They were then suspended by April 2017 at that state government election, where the incoming Labor government had made the decision to discontinue the project, but not before about 18 hectares of remnant native bushland was cleared from within the road reserve. And out of that, a lot of community concern around the clearing, and as a result there was a really kind of firm desire to see that the bushland was restored. So at this point I would just like to acknowledge the Rehabilitating Roe Working Group and Steering Committee, which is good timing because Guy's just walked in and he was on there. So the working group managed the cleared areas, the management of the cleared areas in the interim, and also set up a process to tender for the management plan work, which we were brought on for. And the steering committee specifically managed the coordination of preparing the management plan. So you can see there's, I won't go through the whole list, but there was a cast of thousands, and yeah, a lot of people put in a lot of work a long time before we even came onto the scene. So, not a standard project. What we kind of mean with that is that it was very high profile, and there was very broad and very kind of keen interest in the outcome of the plan, and also the outcomes of the plan when it was to be implemented. A wide range of stakeholders. It was a community-led project. Local people were very interested in the project, and then what I think I mean there by local and interested, there was also the interested members of the broader community as well playing their role. Local government was significant. The City of Coburn were set to become the management authority of the site. You had the state government, of course, with the Labor government's decision, and state agencies such as Main Roads and Department of Biodiversity, who were either the current management authority or managed adjacent conservation assets. And then tertiary institutions and research groups who had an interest in the whole saga. From our perspective as consultants as well, there were also kind of reasonably tight timeframes, which is not unusual, but always kind of makes our life more interesting. We had to try and get the plan ready so that work could be put in place for the next year. So what this meant for us is that there were high expectations. We had to make sure that the plan had a variety of opportunities for involvement, various levels, various people. People were obviously looking for value for money, but also that there was sufficient funds as well behind the project. A really interesting kind of tension between the state government agencies who might have to hand over the funding and obviously want to keep a restraint on that. In Western Australia, restraint on government funding has been a big theme for the last couple of years. But you had the local government there who was happy to take on the responsibility of managing the project, but certainly didn't want to do that unless they had enough resources to get that done. So that made for a kind of interesting balance. And then we had some of the community people just like it, make it as expensive as possible just so they can see what clearing bushland would cost you. So we had all of that in the mix. People wanted the very best practice methods that we could put in place. It's a real desire to have kind of research level data come out of the project, but also that it be accessible for kind of citizen science involvement and other levels of interaction with the project on top of the planting and things that people want to do. And people are really looking for regular, open communication, which links back to the accountability. Like the whole process of Roe was very kind of traumatic for a lot of people, and they wanted to see that the project was doing what they'd been promised was going to have come to pass. So, how did we go about the challenge? So, luckily for us, not long before all of this, SERA had published its National Standards for the Practice of Ecological Restoration. Turns out one of my colleagues knew one of the contributing authors, and we'd ended up with a hard copy which I had on my desk, so I'm sitting there looking at the tender, thinking, oh, maybe we'll do it like this. It was good for consultants, kind of roll some good ideas, but all jokes aside, like it really suited the particular needs of Roe 8, given that there was some kind of well thought out scheme there to give people confidence that what we were providing had all the right systems and all the right components to get the job done. So I won't run through all the principles, but no, Principle 6, and we ended up kind of weaving the principles through the end document, but the social aspects are critical to successful ecological restoration. And, you know, I don't think there's going to be many better examples really than Roe 8 for an urban restoration kind of project. On top of that, the standards also, of course, provide guidance on planning and implementation and monitoring evaluation, which is all useful. So, this is what it looks like. I partly put this picture up there just to show everyone how thick it is. Right? There's a bit of work that went into it. They did want it hard copy printed out in the end. I wasn't sure whether that's so that they could hit people with it or what the plan was. But it was the main rehabilitation management plan was its title. There was also a number of supporting documents that sat under there, so a community stakeholder feedback report, external context assessment report, target ecosystem identification and baseline inventory report, and forward planning recommendations. 3 minutes. Here we go. So we had some help with the community and stakeholder feedback report through sub-consultant partners creating communities. We had about 15, I think, meetings with key stakeholders. About 210 people ended up inputting into the plan, which was really key. I mean, it was community-led, and we definitely tried to honour that. External context assessment, I think people can understand the value of that. What I quite like about the way that the guidelines provide this process there for inputting information into the plan is that you can take all that background information and just push it into an appendix and it's out of the way. It cleans the document up very nicely. Not to say that it's really important to set everything in context, and we certainly did that, both social and ecological needs. Target ecosystem identification, I won't have time to talk about this too much, but main thing to say is that we're dealing with Banksia woodlands mostly, so a little bit of wetland, but mostly upland Banksia woodland. Really complex ecosystem, and to the point where we have distinct types of Banksia woodland, even through the one project area. So we put detailed work into the composition of those so that we could really evaluate success as well as possible, but we also just put simple labels on them based on emergent canopy species and things, just to make them a little bit more digestible for people. But you know, all that work was done there. Forward planning recommendations were really important because it was a large site. There was no way that it was all going to be done at once. So we broke the site up into little bits to help with that. And plus we're kind of writing the plan at the time that the working group is still managing the site and everything's still going on. So we're just trying to put some things in place there for the guys. So really quickly, a lot in it. It was a really thick report. Probably quick points to say that the social rehabilitation, which is kind of where the rehabilitation came, the rehabilitation plan came from. So people wanted to see the kind of bit of healing in the community. At the same time, they wanted full ecological restoration. So note, Chen in the previous session was talking about it doesn't have to be full ecological restoration, but in this instance the community really wanted to aim for the stars there and do the best possible work, even if it took a long time, even if it was expensive. So I won't run through that. We did adaptive management, there was a project coordinator, and that's the way we kind of, by having that person in that role, that kind of then links the plan and the operation back to the community, and lots of roles for the community agencies within that. Restoration areas were pretty detailed prescription, and because I'm running out of time, I'll just skate through. And then we did with the monitoring system, we had to kind of get something that's going to satisfy high-level staff. Murdoch University did some detailed quadrat work with some more of an in-depth look at reference sites and setting up a way of evaluating success. We put a sampling frame across with a 20 by 20 metre grid, which was the same size as Murdoch's quadrats, but also allow either full mapping, which we did a bit of, or the flexibility at the end as well. Basically any community person, citizen science, anyone involved can take an observation. You know, it's marked in space and time, and we can make use of that. So that was just kind of a nod to, you know, there's going to be work to come in the future, but just trying to set it up with a good system. So the plan's approved, which in itself was a pretty big effort. There's a management authority agreement. Project coordinator role has been filled. We've got plants in the ground this year, so things are away, and they're looking at the land tenure security because the whole area is still a road reserve, and there's more than a few people worried about the highway coming back. So that's being addressed. Still quite a few things to look at in terms of like fauna monitoring and analysis and different things to come. And that's me. Thanks very much for listening. Yeah, it was an interesting site in that they cleared it, but they didn't sculpt the topsoil. So there was a regeneration response in places. So we were kind of mapping that and trying to protect that. In other areas, it was a bit more trampled on just by the machinery moving around the site and the mulch piles that were being put in. But it's also interesting in that you had a cleared area that's the corridor, and then you had the actual vegetation sort of sitting there either side on the wings. So it was just like a vestige of bushland because it was a road reserve and had been left there, near the farm or anything like that before. Yeah. Anyway.
Thanks. We've got our next speaker, Samantha Colbran. Talking about when funding finishes, continuing conservation efforts through community connection. Thanks, Samantha.
Thank you. Good afternoon, I'm Sam from Logan City Council, and this afternoon I'll be talking about the federally funded Slacks Creek Catchment Restoration Project. This project ran for 5 years, commencing in mid-2013 and concluding in June this year. Just briefly, the project outcomes, we had a number of environmental outcomes, but as you can see there was a strong focus on increasing knowledge and engagement of the community. So just a bit of context, Logan City Council is about 20 minutes drive south of Brisbane CBD in good traffic, and Slacks Creek flows through the urban heart of Logan City. So we had 25 hectares over 6 sites, starting with Compton Road up the very top in the upper reaches of the catchment, and a number of project sites in the south. So despite the highly urbanised location of these project sites, there was still a lot of environmental and social aspects and benefits that could be achieved and values that could be restored and recovered. So I'm just going to quickly run through some of the methodologies used to engage the community and achieve those social outcomes. The first key thing is regarding site location and the identification of suitable sites for social and cultural considerations. So beyond your standard restoration projects, but really looking at sites that aren't just focusing on site capture and habitat improvements, but achieving social outcomes. So an example of this is the 9-hectare arboretum at Griffith University Logan campus. So here with species of Indigenous significance and also early European significance, as well as rare and threatened local species have been planted. There's also a network of pathways on the site, and interpretive materials is in the works. Another example is the artificial wetland at Shayla Pioneer Park. So the focus here was restoring a previously large open space and putting in the wetland and providing an educational resource for teaching of wetlands' roles and purpose. Complementing these site locations was a community engagement plan. This community engagement plan really drove the hands-on contact and engagement with the community. So through this we identified a number of field days, workshops and events, and used a wide range of media to make sure we were covering the diversity of the community members within the local community. Additionally, a partner reference group was established, and this formalised engagement with key community groups, so that was key representatives from those community groups that met quite frequently. Additionally, we also partnered with community training organisations such as Access Community Services to support the delivery of programs that provided hands-on training for disadvantaged community groups in the environmental management field. And finally, we ran a community survey at the beginning, middle and end of the project to gauge how community attitudes and knowledge of Slacks Creek had changed as a result of the project. So the outcomes, there was, beyond the rehabilitation of the 25 hectares and over 50,000 plants going in the ground, we also engaged with over 2,000 participants, and this was through 25 community events and 12 community field days, and that's just through Logan City Council itself. We also partnered with Griffith University and the Heart Foundation to run events such as the Logan Fun Run. There was also 97 work experience participants from Access Community Services who worked across the project sites and received on-the-job training at the sites to prepare them for employment in environmental management and conservation area, and to increase their employment opportunities within their local community. There was also the establishment of the seed bank at Griffith University Arboretum, and the establishment of a naturalised stormwater wetland which complements the existing recreational and amenity values at Shayla Pioneer Park. Also, the community surveys showed that there was an increase in the community knowledge and engagement with Slacks Creek, and a flow-on effect with some people undertaking actions on their own properties. I think the outcomes are best captured, though, in a video that was created as part of the project called The Human Side of Tree Planting. So I'll leave it to these guys to share their stories about the impact of the project. Ooh, let's see if that's...
Slacks Creek is a highly urbanised waterway in the city of Logan. It flows through a number of environments, from highly industrialised to more natural habitats. In early 2014, Logan City Council, with Australian government funding, started planting trees along Slacks Creek. Lots of trees. This has helped our environment, but it's also helping people.
And having that that hands-on contact with a particular site over time, like you get to get a more intimate sort of knowledge of like different sections and different plants, and you get to see them growing at different stages. Having that intimate connection is really rewarding.
Griffith Uni and Riverdale and a few of these combined together would total at least 60 to 70,000 plants all up.
I really look forward to potentially bringing like kids or grandkids to some of these sites in generations to come, and saying that we planted all of these trees here. And
when they walk away, you can see in their body language that it gives them that sense of ownership. And once you've got that sense of ownership in the community, you've got the really long-term benefits that flow off with that ownership.
It's important for me to conduct my research within the City of Logan because I'm part of this community. I live here, my son goes to school here, and I grew up here. So it was important for me to connect with my environment.
Revegetation, it stabilises the banks within the river, and it also acts as a filter for any surface runoff that comes off the land.
I love seeing, the native species come back into areas where they were absent only 2 years ago. It's amazing. And it's a kind of a hopeful sign for me that with a little work, you get this big payoff.
What I would really like to see in the next sort of 20 or 30 years is for this whole revegetation project to start really reflecting the natural habitat that should be here, which will encourage a pretty large array of mammals.
Riverdale Park, what can you say? It's a pleasure to walk around it. Now transformed into an extremely exciting site from my point of view, because I've seen so many changes. There's so many different birds.
I spend a lot of time here, so you get the feel of what's happening and the level of appreciation that's within the park. And everyone is very taken by what's happening out there, there's like an ownership, I think they're proud of what's happening around them, it's become our park.
I enjoy coming to Riverdale Park in the city of Logan. It's a beautiful walk through the bush. I love the way everything's being rejuvenated. I love the peaceful environment, the birds. I love seeing the animals.
I use this arboretum at Griffith Uni Logan campus for personal reflection, personal renewal. But it can be on quite a light level just to get a break, and then sometimes it's on quite deep levels.
It's very important for us to have places like this in suburbia, because we need more than just an open park of grass. We need to get back to the way how nature was, and by doing all this vegetation work, planting grasses and trees and plants again, we can see what the land around us was before settlement. The trees and the bush is like the lungs of the earth, and the creeks and the river system is like the arteries, and we need to have a healthy environment to enjoy the outdoors.
My vision for this area would be a community understanding of its value. My passion for this area is not just because I live here, it's because I'd like to see it transform back to what it was before.
So we did meet some challenges, and these were mainly regarding changes in the availability of external community groups over the course of the project. So the first of this was with regards to the ongoing engagement of the groups within the organisations within the partner reference group. And these groups, their availability and capacity to contribute in some way to the project changed over time. This was mostly due to the fact that these groups were volunteer run and were already extremely busy managing their own processes. Another one was regards to involvement of traditional owners. There's 2 traditional owner groups within the area, and just the amount of time taken to engage with them, especially with the Commonwealth Games coming up and them getting involved in that space. With this said, the main requested involvement of traditional owners was in regards to information sharing for interpretive signage, and there's still scope for this to be carried out. And the other one was the availability of external funding for community training organisations such as Access Community Services. So they rely on federal or state funding, and at some stages throughout the project they didn't always receive that funding, so they weren't able to carry out identified project tasks. With this said, so over the last 12 to 18 months of the project team began discussing and addressing the question of continuing the community connections to the project post federal funding. So a number of key community stakeholders who have been involved in the project communicated with the project team their interest in forming a conservation group, and the Slacks Creek Catchment Restoration Group was formalised in January of this year. The group have attended a number of flagstone events at the project sites and have a growing list of interested community members. They've also received 2 grants from Logan City Council to undertake conservation work and environmental education at the Griffith University Arboretum. So, and also the other challenges, the things that we're working on now are to address those challenges that were identified. So we've been talking with those community groups that were part of the reference group and identifying how we can actually proactively help them to deliver on-ground projects, and that's mainly been in regards to building their capacity to apply for grants to get the funding that they need to carry out those on-ground works. So we're working with carrying out some grant education workshops. We're working with community organisations such as Access Community Services a bit more ahead of time, so we can more proactively input into their grant applications to hopefully make them a bit more successful when they go to state and federal funding. And we're also working collaboratively with the landholders. So, for example, at Griffith University, we're providing that technical information input, and as part of the handover of the asset, Logan City Council and the Water and Carbon Group presented them with a concept plan for the Arboretum, which really identifies the recreational opportunities for the site and can help them with applying for grants in the future. So I guess the main lessons learnt from this is that it can be quite challenging to plan a 5-year project with numerous project partners and community groups and expect that the involvement of each partner and all the community groups will go as planned. And so it's key to have some flexibility in regards to your project partners and your community involvements. A major lesson learned from the human side of tree planting video was that projects like this can mean so many different things to so many different people and really have significant impacts on individuals. And it's really important as a project team delivering what is essentially an environmental project to not only just focus on the obvious of trees in the ground, but really focus on delivering a project that fosters that human interaction. So I really just hope that this project can be an example for other practitioners who may need to operate within a fixed budget but also have some imagination to create sites that are more than just trees in the ground, and creating individual human connections to restoration sites itself is as important as the restoration works. I'd just like to thank all the partners involved.
So Suzanne Pritchard, who's going to be talking about 6 years and $250,000. What a community group learned from implementing a major project. Thank you, Suzanne.
My name is Suzanne Pritchard. I'm involved with the Coal Point Progress Association. I've been their president since 1995. We're a not-for-profit community group. The Threatened Species Last Stand on the Coal Point Peninsula project was funded by the Environmental Trust's Community Bush Regeneration Large Project Stream. And the objectives of that project were to improve the ecological connectivity within and between the areas, regenerate degraded natural areas, improve the ongoing health and resilience for threatened ecosystems and flora and fauna, and improve the capacity of the group by resourcing the group and also strengthening the local community organisation. I'm very pleased to say we ticked all of those objectives on the boxes. The $250,000 grant, it exceeded $151,000 of cash and direct in-kind contributions. Volunteers provided 29,700 hours of labour, conservatively valued at $891,000, and that put the community input into the project to over $1 million. And the first lesson we learnt was how to track dollars and hours. Page down. Nope. So Coal Point Peninsula, it's we can do this on. We're here in Brisbane. Sydney's down here. We're 230 kilometres north of Sydney, in the beautiful city of Lake Macquarie, and we're on a peninsula that still has connectivity to the Wadigan Mountains. The Progress Association Hall is located on the tip of the peninsula. It was built in 1951 by the founding members. That long history in the community embedded the organisation well and truly within the local fabric, and that gave us a really strong foundation for connecting the community to the one thing that we all had in common, which was our local environment. So we started land caring in 1995, and our original mission was to look after the public reserves. Land care in Lake Macquarie is supported by the council. There's over 300 groups now, but our group is incorporated, and so we could independently apply for funding, which we did. And throughout the project, we received some really lovely awards, Community Group of the Year and the Peabody Award, which came with $2,500, which is very nice when you have to fund the maintenance of your community hall. The first step in the project was to actually work out what we knew on the ground before we did any on-ground work. We knew we had high-level resilience on the site because we've been land carrying it for 20 years. We knew there'd been some sightings of squirrel gliders down here at the tip of the point. A ground truth survey told us that we had 3 times the number of hollows on the peninsula than the city average. That was probably why we still had some squirrel gliders floating around. And we also knew that there was this mosaic of public-private land all through the peninsula, and that was being compromised by fragmentation and the populations were at risk of isolation. The large bushland blocks were being turned into small backyard houses, and that was a real risk for our threatened species. We also found out that Council had this lovely corridor map, and our job really was to try and connect these dots and improve the connectivity. So the grant allowed us, it was a dream project. We put everything that we really wanted to do into it, and it allowed us to work with the private landholders. We did achieve some really great connections on the ground. This little link here, whilst not particularly significant, has one of the highest species diversities of any of the bushland reserves. That was extended into the land care portfolio. There's an acquisition zone that runs through the peninsula, and people can request council to purchase their backyards off them, basically. And 6 to 8 of those properties were purchased throughout the project. The Progress Association also sold its backyard back, which was 675 square metres. And so the reserve was expanded. We also engaged Hunter Water, who has a water tank up here, a water reservoir, and they actually undertook bush regeneration on their land for the first time, and they funded $6,000 of bush regen. But one of the real achievements was that the community also got involved whenever the corridor was threatened, and we would request people put in submissions on development applications, and in 2 DAs, over hundreds of objections were put in, really raising the bar on what the community deemed was acceptable. We also needed to know what threatened species were on the peninsula, and this map of 2013, really people hadn't really looked very much about what was out there, but throughout the project we formally identified the presence of Tetratheca juncia, a locally threatened species, flower, this one down here. We identified squirrel gliders, the powerful owls moved in, and we had some bird surveys done. So we actually confirmed the presence of these threatened species, and that once again that really supported any of the objections we had to developments that compromised the integrity of the bushland corridor. The surveying was undertaken by a variety of ways. We had skilled up high school students who recorded over 200 clumps of Tetratheca juncia. It hadn't been recorded at all on the peninsula prior to the project. We had formal bird surveys undertaken. Tom Clark here did 21 seasonal surveys, and when the project finished it was handed over to 2 local volunteers who are now surveying monthly. We also did some formal surveying. We had experts help us set up quadrats and transects in the reserves that weren't big enough, and we provided training opportunities every year to go back over the plots and record the species diversity and the coverage. And that gave us some nice quantitative data, some beautiful species lists that went on to help to be used in a lot of the education products. Oops. One of the other surveys we did a spotlighting survey, and on the first spotlighting night, 50 metres down the track, we saw we had our first squirrel glider identified, which was really wonderful news because they were in an area down here where we didn't actually know they existed. Previously they'd only been sighted up here. And it really changed our way of trying to engage with the community. We'd been trying to get local landholders involved. We had land clearing sessions in specific areas for them. We were trying discovery walks, treasure hunts to try and get the kids involved, to get the parents involved. And whilst we were attracting people from outside the area, we weren't getting any landholders, local landholders in. So the squirrel glider became our way of connecting the community with the corridor. We offered to install nest boxes on people's private property as well as on public land. The local men's shed built 30 nest boxes for us, and 16 went up in the public reserves and 14 went on private property, and we surveyed them annually. 4 of the boxes had been used and had 1 to 6 squirrel gliders in them. And about the same time, the powerful owl moved in, which was really lovely. Once again, we've got some amazing hollows. This one is on Hunter Water land, and it has a really great photo op. So the people who find out about it first are usually the Hunter bird observers, and they come out with their cameras. and we have a local wildlife carer who also monitors it. So they let us know when the powerful owl comes about, and then we share the news. So we have a community newsletter that gets hand-delivered to 1,600 residents into their letterbox every month, and it goes online as well in the form of a blog, and we have a Facebook page as well. The value of keeping the community engaged regularly, sharing all of the activities that are available, has really been one of the reasons why I think that one of the reasons why the project has been really successful. So we've had over 15,000 hours of land care and bush regen, and another 2,000 of contract hours. We have a land care team that's 8 to 12 strong that meet every Thursday. A real game changer in the project was using the bush regen contract dollars to support a bush regen trainer that came out with a busload of volunteers and helped us to work on site. That really provided an incentive, not an incentive, but real support for the group that had been working for 15 years previously. And we got some really good outcomes. Some garden escape patches, and they look like they're a weedy mess. We've got still some work to do. We have a lovely EEC, or there are wetlands that has 3 EECs in it that's on a real recovery trajectory. Thanks to some great combinations of works, contract bush generators came in and did a primary weed. The land care group followed up regularly. We had 3 National Tree Day plantings on site. It was a really high profile site. And this lady here, Diane, she works 2 hours every day maintaining the reserve. If you don't have a Diane, you can always burn it. That was another really good outcome that wasn't planned at the beginning of the project, but produced some really amazing results, transforming what was an asparagus fern carpet into a real biodiverse bushland with a great structure. We've got a shrub lane now that never really existed. And through all of this, we've been trying to share at every opportunity. We had spotlighting events, bus tours, field days where we demonstrated various techniques. We've engaged TAFE students. We've had 125 events over the 6 years and 4,100 attendees. We've also been supporting the youth in the area. The local school, we've turned a fishbone fernery into a squirrel glider food forest. We've supported the local preschool with annual visits, and we've created an event kit, which is basically every bird or stuffed toy that we could find of the local animals, and some cards to match. It's just a matching thing, but really well received. The project sort of went, the last year was pretty intense. We hosted Questicon's travelling EarthQuest exhibition at the hall, and with that did an observational trail. We had 650 people go through the exhibition and the trail over the week, and that was a real insight into the need to have just localised bush regen, localised environmental ed that people could relate to and just explore the local bushland in a relatively safe and supervised fashion. The other major project was, this is the Hunter Water Reservoir, and this is a mural. It's 170 square metres worth, and it went around the whole tank. The primary school got involved, the high school got involved, and we had an art and craft show to celebrate the end of the project, but also started one, and we offered up a $1,000 threatened species award for the, and that got threatened species more represented in the art and craft show. So we've got some legacy communication items. We made posters and booklets, banners and guides to how to support local landholders with identifying and learning how to look after their bushland, treat the weeds, and all of these resources are all available on the website. We had 341 educational items throughout the project, and it sort of culminated with the Bonza Bushland Gardening Guide, which just outlined the main weed threats. It was like a Grow Me Instead guide as well, and allowed us to celebrate the art that had also been created. This is the mural in the background. These are the art from the art and craft show. So the big lessons that we learnt throughout the project, well, basically asking you shall receive. People want to help, and often it's just a matter of asking, and that was a big lesson. Sharing the load was another really good one. Don't be afraid to take on something really big. The mural and the Science Week event, they generated an extra $20,000 of community grants and support just to make them happen. And knowing where you're starting is a really good lesson. But for our group, it's just been a fantastic way to find out what we had, learn how to manage it, and then get the community involved. And there's probably another grant following that up. Yeah, thank you.
What an inspirational project. Lots of questions. So maybe we can catch up in the break.
Yeah, on the other table. So if you want to come up to us, I'll be at the Regen TV.
And those resources are
Yes, yeah, thank you. Thanks. Thank you.
We move over to our final speaker for this session. And we've got Todd Dudley.
Yeah, I think it's that one. Yeah.
I'll just
okay.
make it easy.
Okay. My name's Todd Dudley. I'm from the North East Bioregional Network, which is a community conservation group in North East Tasmania. And so I'm going to be talking about ecological restoration and its importance as from an ethical point of view, and also talking a little bit about our local project, but mainly more bigger picture, I guess, in a way. Probably some of the things I've got to say might be a bit controversial, but and I guess I'm reinforcing to some extent what Dean McDonald said this morning. So I guess I've been doing on-ground restoration work for about 35 years, and it's really just in the last about 10 or 15 years I've really been thinking more about the social and ethical aspects of it rather than just the practicalities of it, about how to get a good environmental outcome. And I just put some of these writers that I'm putting up, I'm just mentioning just because they're really worth reading too, because they go into a lot of depth about ecological restoration and its importance as from an ethical and philosophical point of view, as well as from a practical point of view. So restoration can emerge as a paradigm for learning about the landscape and our relationship with it, as some of these other presenters have shown. So just to clarify, I'm talking, when I talk about ecological restoration, I'm not talking about tree planting. I'm talking about trying to restore systems back to full range of flora and fauna species. And I guess from my perspective, there should be a lot more focus on doing that, and also on identifying areas with high ecological resilience and good landscape context, so that you can actually get really high quality restoration at scale and at for a lot cheaper. And I just mentioned these, Andrew Light and Joseph Sachs, as just two writers that are worth looking into if you're interested in looking more deeply into the ethical and philosophical side of restoration. So as we've mentioned before, there's a lot of benefits in restoration from a social point of view. So basically, the 3 points there. The first one's talking about building ecological ecological citizenship and responsibility for place. The second one is about developing ecological literacy, which is the more science kind of based part of it, I guess. And the third one is about ecological conscience, which is really important. I guess that's what I'm talking about a bit more today, is about actually developing through doing ecological restoration, actually people changing their attitudes towards the environment. So, just on a specific note, our project at Skylines here, where this is in northeast Tasmania, we're restoring 2,000 hectares of radiata pine back to native vegetation. We're having quite a lot of success with that. I've just got a few quick before and after shots. So basically it's just harvesting mature pines and then doing ecological burns, and then mainly based on assisted natural regeneration. So it's we can do large scale reference standard restoration. So that's one example here. That's 7 years later after the fire. That one's about a year after it's been harvested and burnt, and that's 7 years later. So there's been no planting at all there, it's just all natural regeneration. So it's amazing how long the seed bank can last in the soil, and it's really important to not underestimate the resilience of native vegetation in a lot of cases where you would think it would be a write-off. Okay, so, and this is the, some of the team that we've had out on the project there. The main thing I just want to talk about quickly about this is that all of these people, they're all from working class backgrounds, and with restoration, a lot of it's fairly, it's been quite focused, I guess, in more middle class kind of areas, but all these people come from forestry, fishing or mining backgrounds, so having people like that and non-conservation backgrounds, so having them doing ecological restoration, it's changed their attitude to the environment, and we've consciously tried to structure our project around making sure that not only are we looking after the environment, but we're looking after them, because a lot of people who work in those type of industries do tend to get, you know, they work long hours and they tend to get worn out pretty quickly, but we're really focused on trying to structure the work around you know, the amount of hours and all the rest of it, so that they're actually really enjoying it and enthusiastic about it. And that's, I don't think that's something that, it's something that's really important, I think, is to make sure that people are actually getting a really positive experience, so they'll go away and talk to their friends and have a really positive story to tell. And just two of the people in that, one of them was an ex-forestry worker who was an alcoholic, and now he's doesn't drink anymore and is, you know, really healthy. And there was an Aboriginal guy who had a community work order who set fire to 5 different places in St Helens, which is a nearby town, and now he's working as a ranger up at Cape York. So there's been some really interesting stories of people, radical improvements in mental and physical health over fairly short periods of time, and also fairly rapid changes in ethical attitudes as well to the environment, increased understanding of land management principles, and also, really importantly, from a rural community point of view, you know, in Tasmania there's quite a lot of, most rural communities are fairly polarised between pro or anti-conservation, so ecological restoration is the middle ground where you're actually doing something active in the environment but using outdoor practical skills that people in those areas have. So it's a win-win kind of situation where you're actually getting conservation gains but actually getting a whole lot of people from non-conservation backgrounds on site. So, let's see. And we've got the lots of school kids and other people involved in the project, but I think the really important point with some of the work we've been doing is that we actually have created an economic base for restoration, but nowhere near significant enough or long-term enough, but it's great to have voluntary working bees and get the community and school children out there, but especially from a kid's point of view, it'd be ideal if we actually have a process where they can go from being interested when they're in school to be actually there being jobs in restoration, and that's still nowhere near enough opportunities for people to do that kind of work. Let's see, and then I guess the other side of the equation is that is through that process of getting more and more people from rural communities on side, then we have a change in attitude, and so you don't get so much hooning and dumping rubbish and shooting signs and all those kind of things that happen in lots of rural areas of Australia. So yeah, as Teen said this morning, ecological restoration, bush regeneration is only a really recent phenomenon in Australia, and obviously it was started by people who felt that they needed to become actively involved in looking after the environment, doing something about the fact that we're losing our biodiversity. So obviously a lot of us are motivated by life and beauty, but that can only go so far. And as Brendan Mackey said, he's a well-known ecologist, appeals to reason and morality are doomed to be ignored unless matched with supportive public policies, regulatory regimes and resources. So that's where we're at really. We've got lots of people who want to do the right thing and a lot of interest, but we haven't got enough money, and we've got a whole lot of different policies and laws that are actually in conflict with conservation. So next thing is some areas, some things that are obviously, so we're not talking about, well, the term that we in Jordan use is ecocentric restoration, which is supposed to specifically talk about restoration where the main motivating factor is you're restoring species for their own sake, regardless of whether they're useful or not to people. So there's a few things here I just thought I'd run through quickly that are obviously, or to a more or less extent, potentially in conflict with that. Obviously, perpetual economic growth and population growth on a finite planet definitely is in conflict. I think I can understand the argument for using terms like ecosystem services and natural assets as a way of trying to convince politicians and economists that the environment matters, but I think life and beauty matters more. And I think the more we use economic language, the more we're actually we're not really telling it how we feel. And I think it's better to actually use language that isn't based on economics, because economics really, as it has been, is the problem rather than the solution. It's just my point of view. I think language does matter. Novel ecosystems, which is, Team didn't actually mention the word novel ecosystems, but I think she was more or less, that was the conflict between, I guess, the idea of looking at reference standard ecosystems as the main objective of ecological restoration, as opposed to quite a few people are saying, well, it doesn't really matter. I think it does matter. And one of the reasons why I think it matters is because part of the value of doing high value bush regeneration and ecological restoration is that it actually generates a range of ethics and values and knowledge that you don't generate if you take a novel ecosystem approach, even though I don't really know what a novel ecosystem approach is. But and also, I think on the issue of cultural landscapes, which is something that Bill Gamage, for instance, has brought up recently, I think that it's important to not lose sight of the fact that while humans have influenced the environment in Australia, that really the dominant factor in creating and maintaining our landscapes is natural processes that have evolved over billions of years in Australia. So, just to finish off, so I just want to make the case for, just a quick ethical justification for why ecocentric restoration or ecological restoration is an important social and ecological principle. So, basically, what I'm saying with this first point is that, from my point of view anyway, is that the relationship between humans and the environment over millennia has really been one based on a utilitarian relationship where our main focus in our relationship with nature is useful species and using nature to generate resources for us. The idea of restoring ecosystems and species for their own sake and irrespective of their value to people as a resource is a relatively modern concept. And so what I'm saying is that ecological restoration can be a cultural counterpoint to utilitarianism and anthropocentrism, as well as an active and practical way of engendering an ecologically positive relationship between nature and people.